On a cold morning at a Colorado train station, a K-9 officer named Ranger suddenly stopped in front of an old railcar, refusing to move despite repeated commands. When Officer Lucas checked, he discovered an old military dog collar, still carrying the scent of smoke and earth. Its owner, Thomas, a former K-9 handler, had hidden the collar under a seat for 10 years, haunted by the loss of his dog Max during an explosion in Afghanistan. Somehow, Ranger had sensed the lingering scent, forcing Thomas to confront the grief he had buried. When Thomas decided to bring the collar to his veterans therapy group, he realized that letting go did not mean forgetting. It meant allowing Max to keep walking beside him in a different way, turning hidden pain into a quiet, living memory that would guide him forward instead of holding him back. Officer Lucas Grant stepped out of his patrol vehicle and into the cold breath of an early Colorado morning. The sky was a pale wash of blue, the air smelled like wet leaves and iron, and the old Union train station loomed ahead of him with its high arched windows and soot-streaked brick. He adjusted his utility belt, feeling the comforting tug of weight at his hips, and glanced down at Ranger, who leapt from the back seat with quiet readiness. Ranger was a 4-year-old Dutch Shepherd, all sleek lines and focused eyes. A creature built for purpose yet alive with a kind of gentle awareness that always made Lucas feel steadier than he deserved. The dog sniffed the cold air, his breath puffing in small clouds that vanished before they rose. The station was waking up slowly. Coffee steam drifted from the open doors of a vendor cart near the platform, and the metallic clatter of tools echoed from a worker tightening bolts on the rail switches. Pigeons flapped along the roofline, settling and resettling as the morning began to gather speed. Today there would be a ceremony for veterans in the Central Hall, and the department had assigned Lucas and Ranger to a full security sweep before the guests arrived. Lucas touched Ranger's head briefly. "Let's work." They moved together across the cracked concrete of the loading area, Ranger's paws silent but sure, Lucas's boots tapping in a slow rhythm. They checked the service trucks, the electrical panels, and the shadows between stacks of crates where the last of the night's fog still clung. Every so often Ranger would pause, nose tilting to catch the trace of something on the air, a small furrow forming between his ears as he considered and then moved on. Lucas had learned to trust that sign. It meant Ranger was working, filtering scents and sounds with a precision no machine could match. Lucas let himself breathe into the rhythm of the work. It was moments like these that reminded him why he had transferred into the K-9 unit. After years of patrol calls that ended in heartbreak or frustration, he found in these quiet dawn sweeps a rare sense of purpose. With Ranger beside him, the world felt less unpredictable. Dogs, his instructor had told him once, do not lie. They do not pretend to understand you when they don't, and they do not mask their loyalty with polite words. You earn their respect or you do not, and once earned, it is the purest thing you will ever receive. The low whistle of a departing freight train rolled across the tracks, blending with the soft click of Ranger's claws on the pavement. Lucas scanned the platform, his eyes catching on the details that made the station feel alive. A young woman huddled on a bench with a paper cup clutched in both hands. A maintenance worker stretched his back beside a toolbox. A security camera swung slowly on its mount, following the shape of the platform as if it too were waking up. Lucas clipped off Ranger's leash to give him more space. The dog moved ahead, scanning under benches and around trash bins, ears flicking, tail lifted in quiet focus. Lucas kept a careful distance, watching his partner, letting the dog guide the pace of their patrol. They moved toward the older section of the platform where an abandoned green and silver passenger car sat waiting for auction, its windows filmed with dust, paint peeling in strips like old wallpaper. The car was set to be moved next week, but for now, it was just another place to clear before the ceremony. Lucas checked the time on his watch and exhaled, his breath fogging in the cold. Another hour, he thought, and then they would grab breakfast. Ranger paused and glanced back at him, as if reading the thought, eyes bright, tongue briefly flicking out before he returned to his work. The morning light was shifting, turning the world from gray to gold as it slid through the gaps in the station roof, pooling on the ground in patches that shimmered when Ranger passed through them. Lucas adjusted the volume on his radio, listening for updates, hearing only the faint crackle of static and the murmur of another officer checking in from a nearby checkpoint. There was something peaceful in the way Ranger moved, the silent dance of muscle and breath. the clear line of focus that never wavered. Lucas often found himself grateful for it, for the way this dog turned each shift into something more than routine. It was a reminder of why he put on the uniform every day, why he returned to the station even on mornings when the cold seemed to press against his bones with unnecessary sharpness. Ranger paused again, head lifting, nose twitching, ears pivoting like small antennae. Lucas felt his own body tense, the automatic response of a handler attuned to the smallest signals. For a moment, everything else fell away, leaving only the dog, the handler, and the cold platform beneath their feet. "Ready," Lucas said softly. And together they moved forward, toward the waiting train car, the morning stillness folding around them as the world prepared to reveal what lay hidden in its quiet corners. Ranger slowed as they approached the old passenger car, his steps turning cautious, head lowered, nose working the cold morning air with deliberate care. Lucas felt the shift instantly, a subtle tightening in the leash that was no longer clipped. The way Ranger's tail lowered just slightly, the flick of his ears. It was a language Lucas had learned to read without words, the silent signals of a dog who had found something that needed to be known. The train car was quiet, resting on rusted rails that led nowhere, its steps streaked with old rain, its windows reflecting the pale blue of the Colorado morning sky. A gust of wind rattled the loose metal sign hanging on the door, a soft clang that echoed in the stillness. Ranger moved closer, paused silent on the concrete, and stopped in front of the narrow steps that led into the car. Lucas watched him carefully. Ranger's nose hovered near the bottom step, the dog's eyes narrowing as he inhaled, then exhaled in a slow, controlled breath. His body stiffened, ears pricking forward, tail going still. Then, with deliberate certainty, Ranger sat down. Lucas's heart thumped once, hard, then settled into a steady beat. He knew this posture. Ranger had only done it a few times during their partnership, but each time it meant the same thing. It was not a casual pause, not curiosity or hesitation. It was an alert. The platform felt suddenly smaller, the sounds of the waking station fading into a muted hum behind him. Lucas took a slow step forward, eyes on Ranger, hands relaxed but ready. Ranger did not move. His eyes stayed locked on the shadow beneath the steps, nose working, body still as stone except for the slight quiver of concentration in his muscles. "Ranger, heel," Lucas said quietly. The dog did not budge. Lucas exhaled, shifting his weight, letting the silence settle between them. He glanced around, noting the slow movement of a maintenance worker pushing a cart of tools along the opposite platform, the curious glance of a coffee vendor who paused mid-pour, the distant sound of a freight train horn echoing down the tracks. The world continued, unaware of the moment that had crystallized here between a handler and his dog. "Easy, boy," Lucas said again, softer now. Ranger remained seated, tail flat on the concrete, eyes steady, ears forward. His body was alive with tension, not fear, but the electric focus that came when a dog found something that mattered. Lucas knew better than to force the dog to move. Ranger's training was clear. When he sat like this, it meant he had found something important, something that needed to be seen, something that Lucas's human senses could not yet detect. Lucas crouched down, bringing himself to Ranger's level, his eyes scanning the area around the steps. Nothing seemed out of place. A scrap of paper fluttered in the breeze, catching on the corner of the step before drifting away. There was a thin line of dirt along the edge, a few pebbles, the glint of a metal screw half buried in the crack. Ordinary details in an ordinary place. But Ranger did not believe in ordinary. His breathing was steady, his gaze fixed, his body still in that perfect alert position that spoke louder than any words. Lucas felt a ripple of pride and worry move through him. He trusted Ranger more than he trusted himself in these moments, but it was always a sharp reminder that they were in this job for a reason, that danger could hide in the quietest places. Behind him, the maintenance worker stopped, watching with curiosity that edged into concern. "Everything okay over there, officer?" Lucas lifted a hand without turning his head, his eyes on Ranger. "Just give us a minute here, please." The man nodded and moved away, but Lucas could feel the eyes on his back, the questions hanging in the air. He turned his attention back to Ranger, lowering himself to one knee to see better beneath the step. It was dark under there, shadows pooling in the narrow space, the air still and cold. "What do you have, boy?" Lucas murmured. Ranger's ears flicked at the sound of his voice. but he did not move his gaze. His nose dipped once, a short, deliberate movement toward the shadow. Then he lifted his eyes back to Lucas, holding the contact for a brief, silent moment before returning his focus to the hidden space. Lucas felt it then, the weight of the moment pressing around them, the cold air sharp in his lungs, the quiet of the station folding into a tense, waiting silence. This was the moment that came before discovery. The breath held before truth revealed itself. Ranger remained still, a silent sentinel beside the steps, refusing to move, refusing to look away, waiting for Lucas to see what he already knew was there. Lucas heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching before he saw the man appear from around the corner of the platform. The man moved with a measured pace, neither hurried nor slow, his boots landing with the steady rhythm of someone who had learned to walk carefully through life. He was older, maybe in his early 60s, with a lean build that suggested a history of strength, a weathered face framed by a few days of gray stubble, and eyes that seemed to scan everything around him before settling on Ranger. The man wore a brown canvas jacket, the cuffs frayed from years of use, and a dark green cap pulled low against the morning chill. In one hand he carried a thermos, steam rising in small wisps from the top, the scent of strong coffee drifting on the cold air as he came closer. "Is there a problem here, officer?" His voice was calm, low, carrying the slight roughness of someone who had spent many mornings speaking into the wind. Lucas stood slowly, his hand resting lightly on Ranger's back, feeling the steady tension in the dog's muscles. "Sir, my name is Officer Lucas Grant, K9 Unit." He nodded toward Ranger, who remained seated, eyes locked on the shadow beneath the steps, body still as a statue. "This is Ranger. We are performing a routine security sweep of the station this morning. Your train car is within our sweep zone, and my partner here has indicated something under steps." The man's eyes shifted from Lucas to Ranger, studying the dog with a kind of distant familiarity, a flicker of recognition that passed across his face before it settled into something softer, something almost like sorrow. "That old car is mine, at least for now." He glanced at the weathered train car, then back at Ranger. "I rent it from the city while I get things figured out." Lucas nodded, letting the quiet hold for a moment. "Would you mind telling me your name, sir?" The man exhaled, a slow breath that clouded in the cold air before fading. "Thomas Rourke." He adjusted the thermos in his hand, fingers tightening briefly around the metal. "I'm not looking to cause trouble, officer." Lucas shook his head. "You're not in any trouble, Mr. Rourke. I appreciate your cooperation. It's just that when a trained dog alerts like this, we need to take it seriously. Do I have your permission to take a look inside?" Thomas looked at the car again, his eyes lingering on the chipped paint, the rust that lined the edges of the windows, the small rectangle of glass that caught the pale morning light and scattered it back in a thin beam across the platform. He nodded once, the movement small but sure. "Yeah, you can look." He paused, eyes flicking back to Ranger, who remained unmoving. "He's a good dog." Lucas allowed himself a small smile, feeling the edge of tension ease just slightly. "The best." Thomas moved to the side, stepping away from the door to give Lucas space. The thermos lowered to his side, and for a moment he simply stood there, watching Ranger, who did not look back at him, did not shift or flinch, but remained steady, focused on the darkness beneath the steps. Lucas stepped closer to the car, feeling the coolness of the metal as he reached for the handle. The door creaked softly as it opened, the smell of old wood and cold air spilling out, mingling with the sharp scent of iron and dust. Light fell into the small space, illuminating worn seats covered with a thin layer of dust, a folded blanket on one of the benches, and a small pile of books stacked carefully near the door. He glanced back at Thomas, who was watching with eyes that seemed to be somewhere far away, standing on the platform but not truly there. Lucas turned back to the steps, dropping to a knee, letting his eyes adjust to the shadows. The cold air pressed against his skin, the roughness of the concrete beneath him grounding him in the moment. Ranger shifted slightly, leaning forward, nose dipping lower, breath slow and controlled. His eyes followed Lucas's every movement, waiting, patient, the silent guardian of whatever truth was hidden in the darkness. Lucas reached forward, his gloved hand brushing against the cold metal of the step, sliding into the space beneath it. His fingers moved carefully, feeling along the edges until they found something soft, something wrapped in fabric, something that did not belong there. He pulled it out slowly, the fabric rough against his gloves, the bundle small and tightly secured with old twine. The fabric was faded, a dull green that once might have been part of a uniform, the edges frayed, the weight of it heavier than it appeared. Lucas turned the bundle in his hands, feeling the shape of it, the way it seemed to hold the air around it in a tight grip. He looked up at Thomas, who had stepped closer, his eyes locked on the bundle, his face pale, his breath catching in the cold. "Is this yours, Mr. Rourke?" Thomas did not answer at first. His eyes stayed on the bundle, his hand gripping the thermos so tightly that Lucas could see the whiteness in his knuckles. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, the words heavy, pulling the air down around them. "I suppose it is." Lucas stood slowly, Ranger moving to his side, eyes shifting between the bundle and Thomas, ears flicking in the quiet. "What is it, sir?" Thomas swallowed, his eyes wet, blinking once before he spoke again. "It's something I haven't been able to let go of." The cold morning felt sharper as Lucas stood there holding the bundle, the thin fabric brushing against his gloves, the weight of it sinking into his hands in a way that made him pause. Ranger sat close, eyes fixed on the bundle, ears forward, breathing slow and even, his body language calm but alert, like he understood this moment carried a gravity different from the others. Thomas set his thermos down on the edge of the platform, the soft thud of metal on concrete sounding louder than it should in the quiet. His hands fell to his sides, fingers flexing once before curling into loose fists, eyes locked on the bundle, as if seeing it for the first time, and yet seeing it with the memory of 1,000 mornings just like this. Lucas looked down at the bundle again, noticing how the twine was tied with careful knots, the frayed ends tucked under in a way that felt practiced, deliberate, like someone who had tied and untied the same piece of string many times, each knot a small act of remembering. The fabric was stained in places, darker spots that spoke of time and travel, the edges worn thin where fingers had rubbed the same lines over and over. Ranger leaned in, nose hovering just above the bundle, breathing in softly, exhaling in a quiet huff that stirred the loose threads on the fabric. His eyes flicked up to Lucas, holding his gaze for a moment, the soft brown depth in them reflecting the cold light of the morning, then returned to the bundle, focused, patient. Lucas crouched down, balancing the bundle on one knee as he carefully began to untie the twine. Each pull of the knot felt like it echoed in the air between them, the scratch of the fibers giving way under steady pressure, the fabric loosening around something inside that shifted with a soft, muted clink. Thomas's breath caught in his throat, the sound barely there, and Lucas glanced up to see the man's eyes glisten, the tightness in his jaw as he watched. Ranger's ears twitched, his gaze flicking between the bundle and Thomas, reading the air, sensing the emotions that were unspoken but heavy in the cold. When the last knot came loose, Lucas unfolded the fabric slowly, layer by layer, revealing a small metal collar, its surface scratched and dented, the brass tag still attached but worn to the point that the name engraved on it was barely legible. There was a small leather strap tied around the collar, cracked from age, and a faint smell of earth and something older, something that carried the scent of the past. Thomas stepped forward, his hand hovering above the collar, but not touching it, his eyes tracing the lines of the metal, the way the tag swung slightly as a breeze moved across the platform. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out, and his hand trembled before he pulled it back to his side. Ranger sniffed the collar once, then sat back, his eyes lifting to Thomas, waiting, patient, silent. Lucas spoke quietly, his voice steady, the cold air turning each word into a small cloud. "Mr. Rourke, would you like to tell me about this?" Thomas took a breath, long and shaking, pulling the cold into his lungs, holding it there before letting it out with a soft sound that was almost a sigh. That belonged to Max. His voice was rough, the name catching in his throat as he said it, eyes locked on the collar. "He was my partner." Thomas paused, swallowing hard, his hands coming up to rub at his face before falling back to his sides. "I worked K-9 rescue overseas, Afghanistan mostly. Max was with me every day. Smart dog, strong, never backed down from anything. Saved my life more than once. The wind moved across the platform again, lifting the edges of the fabric beneath the collar, the metal catching a faint glint of the pale sun as it rose higher in the sky. What happened to him? Lucas kept his voice quiet, careful, knowing this question was heavy, knowing it was important to ask. Thomas's shoulders sagged, the weight of memory settling across him like a physical thing. He looked down, blinking hard, his lips pressing together before he found the words. There was an explosion. He paused, drawing in another breath, steadying himself. Max found it before it found us. He took the worst of it. The silence that followed was filled with the soft sounds of the waking station, the distant call of a train horn, the hum of electricity in the wires overhead, the quiet breathing of Ranger sitting close, eyes on Thomas, unmoving, present. Thomas wiped at his face, the motion quick, almost embarrassed. I couldn't leave him behind, not all of him. His eyes lifted to the collar, and for a moment, there was a softness in his gaze that cut through the roughness of his features. I kept this. I kept him with me. Lucas nodded, understanding in the quiet, feeling the way Ranger stayed close, his presence solid, grounding, a reminder that some bonds do not break, even when the world tries to tear them apart. Ranger shifted, leaning forward, and gently pressed his nose against the collar, holding it there for a moment, before sitting back, his eyes lifting to Thomas with a calm, quiet understanding that words could never fully express. Thomas stood there, shoulders lifted with tension as if the cold air pressed against him harder than it did against anyone else on the platform. His eyes stayed on the collar, the brass tag swinging gently as the morning breeze moved across the concrete, carrying the scent of old rail steel and the faint bitterness of coffee from the vendor down the platform. Ranger did not move. The dog sat close to the collar, his breathing calm, ears forward, eyes warm and steady on Thomas. Lucas watched this silent exchange, feeling how the world seemed to shrink around them, drawing into the small space where grief and memory were unfolding without needing to be announced. Thomas took a step closer, the scuff of his boots soft on the concrete, his hands flexing once before falling still at his sides. His mouth opened as if to speak, closed again, then finally, with a quiet breath, the words began to come. Max was assigned to me on my second tour. Thomas's voice was quiet, rough around the edges but steady, like a man who had carried these words inside for so long they had worn grooves in his soul. German Shepherd. Big, broad chest, dark eyes that could see through you. He shook his head, a faint smile flickering and disappearing. He was a working dog, but he was more than that. He had a way of reading the room, of knowing when someone needed space, and when someone needed him to sit close. We worked search and rescue, clearing routes, looking for signs of life under rubble, you name it. Lucas shifted his weight, the morning air pressing against his neck as he listened. Ranger stayed perfectly still, as if he understood that this was not a moment for movement but for witnessing. We were in a village, out past the ridgelines, far from the main roads. Thomas's eyes grew distant, seeing something that was not the platform, not the cold rails or the city buildings rising in the distance. His gaze turned inward, and for a moment he was somewhere else entirely. We were checking a building, old clay walls cracked from shelling. There was a smell, the kind that sticks with you, of dust and heat and something gone wrong. Max went ahead, like he always did, nose down, checking corners, moving careful but confident. He stopped, looked back at me, and sat down. His voice caught, and Thomas swallowed, blinking once, then twice, before continuing. I thought it was clear. I really did. He drew in a sharp breath, letting it out slowly, the cold air clouding between them. But it wasn't. Thomas's hand lifted, hovering above the collar before pulling back, fingers curling into his palm. The blast took the wall down, took him with it. If he hadn't stopped when he did, if he hadn't turned to look back, I would have been right behind him. Silence wrapped around the words, holding them there in the cold morning light. Lucas felt the heaviness of them, the weight they carried. The years they had lived inside Thomas, unspoken but alive. I couldn't bring him home. Thomas's voice was softer now, almost a whisper. But I found this, in the rubble. His collar burned at the edges, the tag half melted, but it was him. It was all I could bring back. Ranger shifted, leaning forward, his nose brushing lightly against the collar again. A soft huff of breath that stirred the worn fabric beneath it. Thomas's eyes flicked down to the dog, and for a moment, there was a connection between them that words could not reach, a silent understanding of service, loss, and the loyalty that outlives everything else. I carried it with me, every place I went, every move, every job. Couldn't let it go, couldn't look at it either. So I kept it under the seat, kept it close but hidden. His eyes lifted to Lucas, and in them was a mixture of apology and defiance, the look of a man who had nothing to hide but everything to lose. I know it's not protocol, officer. I know how it must look. Lucas shook his head, a quiet reassurance in the motion. You don't need to explain. Ranger knew what this was. That's why he wouldn't move. Thomas looked at the dog, eyes wet, jaw working as he tried to find the words. His hand lifted again, trembling slightly, and this time he let it fall onto Ranger's head, fingers brushing through the fur, resting there with a familiarity that came not from knowing this dog, but from knowing dogs like him. Thank you. The words were quiet, meant for Ranger as much as for Lucas, carrying a weight that settled softly into the morning air. Ranger closed his eyes briefly, leaning into the touch before sitting back, ears flicking once, eyes lifting to meet Thomas's with a calm patience that seemed to say it was okay, that he understood. Lucas stood there, letting the moment breathe, letting Thomas's hand remain on Ranger's head, letting the cold morning hold them in a quiet, shared space where grief could be seen without shame and loyalty could be felt without needing to be spoken aloud. The platform remained quiet around them, the slow rhythm of the morning shifting as a distant train horn echoed across the tracks. Lucas felt the cold breeze brushing against his neck, while Ranger remained still, the weight of Thomas's hand resting lightly on his head. It was a small moment, but it felt like the world paused to let it happen, to let the quiet bond between a man and a dog stretch across years and loss without interruption. Thomas lifted his hand slowly, letting it fall back to his side, fingers curling into the fabric of his jacket as he stepped back. His eyes moved from Ranger to the collar on the ground, the brass tag catching a thin shard of sunlight breaking through the clouds above the station. The tag swung gently as the breeze moved it, a silent rhythm that seemed to echo the slow beating of hearts standing in the cold. I haven't talked about him in a long time. Thomas's voice was low, words coming carefully, as if speaking them aloud might disturb something fragile inside him. Not even in the group therapy sessions I go to on Tuesdays at the community center. Lucas watched him, noting the way Thomas's shoulders rose and fell with each breath, the stiffness in his posture loosening as he spoke. Ranger sat calmly between them, eyes moving from Thomas to Lucas, then back again, as if following the conversation without needing words. I sit there every week. Listen to the others talk about what they've carried back with them, about the things they see when they close their eyes. Thomas's gaze dropped to the collar, a faint shadow moving across his face. I never say anything. I just sit there, hold a cup of coffee, nod when I'm supposed to. I couldn't talk about Max. It felt like if I said his name, it would be like losing him all over again. Lucas nodded, understanding without interrupting. He thought of the first partner he lost. The way the grief felt heavy, like carrying something that pressed against your chest with every step, reminding you that moving forward was possible, but never the same. Thomas glanced up, eyes catching Lucas's for a moment before shifting to Ranger. But looking at your dog now, seeing the way he knew, the way he wouldn't move, it feels like maybe Max has been trying to tell me something all along. His voice shook slightly, the words catching before he cleared his throat and continued. Maybe it's time I stopped hiding him away. Ranger shifted forward, moving closer to the collar on the ground, and lowered his head, touching his nose gently to the brass tag. It was not a trained action, not something Lucas had ever commanded him to do. It was instinct, a quiet moment of recognition between one working dog and the memory of another. Thomas drew in a breath, sharp and unsteady, his eyes closing briefly as he pressed his hand to his mouth. The cold air seemed to hold its breath with him, waiting. Lucas spoke softly, letting the quiet remain but offering words that could land gently. Dogs know things about us that we don't always know how to say. They carry the weight with us, even when we don't realize it. Thomas opened his eyes, blinking against the cold, and let out a breath that fogged in the space between them. I think he's telling me it's okay to talk now. That it's okay to let him be part of my story, not just something I keep hidden under a seat. Lucas nodded again, glancing down at Ranger, who lifted his eyes to meet his handler's gaze before turning back to Thomas with quiet certainty. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Thomas looked back at the collar, the small piece of metal and leather that had become so much more than an object, and then back to Ranger, who remained still, a calm presence in the cold morning air. I've been carrying him with me every mile I've walked since that day. Thomas's voice was soft, the words falling gently like snow. But I think it's time I let others help carry him too. Ranger stepped back, sitting down again beside the collar, ears forward, eyes on Thomas, as if confirming what he had said without speaking, offering a promise of quiet guardianship over what was too precious to lose. Thomas reached down, fingers trembling, and lifted the collar carefully, holding it in both hands. His eyes closed again as he pressed it lightly to his chest, the morning breeze moving around him, ruffling the edges of his jacket, but he did not seem to feel the cold. When he opened his eyes, there was something clearer in them, a lightness that had not been there before, as if speaking the words had lifted some small part of the weight he had carried for so long. Thank you. The words were meant for Ranger, for Lucas, for the morning that had given him this moment to remember and to let go. Lucas nodded, the quiet between them no longer heavy but peaceful, filled with the soft sounds of the waking station, the hum of the wires overhead, the distant clatter of a train preparing to move, and the quiet breathing of Ranger, who sat watchful and calm, knowing that he had done his part. Thomas stood there, holding the collar against his chest, the faded fabric of his jacket pressed around the cold metal and worn leather, as if to shield it from the morning wind. His eyes moved between Lucas and Ranger, the silence folding around them softly, no longer heavy but reverent, like the hush that falls in a chapel when the light through the stained glass catches dust in the air. Ranger sat close, watching Thomas with calm patience, his tail tapping the concrete once, a quiet thump that felt like a promise. His eyes remained warm and steady, brown flecked with gold in the thin morning light, reflecting the careful way Thomas exhaled and let his shoulders drop, letting himself feel how it was to stand without the usual weight pressing down. Thomas lowered the collar, looking at it in his hands as the brass tag swayed slightly, catching the light with each small movement. For a moment he simply held it there, the wind brushing the frayed leather, the faint scent of earth and metal rising as a memory, a reminder of another place and another time. I think I'm ready. His voice was quiet, but there was certainty in it, the kind that comes not from a single moment but from years of holding something too tightly, only to find that letting go did not mean forgetting. Lucas nodded, standing beside Ranger, feeling the cold air in his lungs, the warmth of his partner beside him. What would you like to do? Thomas looked down at the collar again, then glanced back at the train car, the old green and silver exterior faded by weather and time, its windows reflecting the sky in fractured pieces. His eyes lingered there, seeing something that no one else could, a memory living in the space between the rusted steel and cracked glass. I'd like to take him with me today. He lifted his gaze, meeting Lucas's eyes, the soft lines at the corners deepening as he found the words. Every Tuesday I go to that group and I sit there with my coffee and listen. I think it's time I tell them about Max, about what he meant, about what it means to carry him, and about what it means to let him go, too. Lucas felt a quiet swell of respect move through him, a warmth that settled into the cold morning as he nodded. That sounds like something worth sharing. Thomas smiled, a small, tired smile, but it reached his eyes and stayed there. Maybe it's time I stop hiding him away under the seat. Maybe it's time he sits beside me instead. Ranger stood then, stepping closer, and pressed his head gently against Thomas's leg, holding there for a moment. The gesture was quiet, unhurried, the soft connection of fur against fabric, warmth against the cold. Thomas's hand lowered, fingers brushing the top of Ranger's head, moving softly between his ears, a small motion that seemed to echo through the empty space of the platform. "Thank you." Thomas spoke the word softly, meant for Ranger, for Lucas, for the morning that had given him a chance to speak what had remained silent for so long. Ranger pulled back, sitting again, his eyes watching Thomas with a softness that made Lucas's chest tighten for a moment, the quiet pride in his partner's ability to understand what no command could ever teach. Lucas gestured toward the train car, the wind moving across the concrete, carrying the scent of old steel and distant coffee as a few pigeons shifted along the roofline. "Would you like to get your things before you head over?" Thomas glanced at the train car, nodding once, and stepped toward it, moving with the careful gait of someone who had spent years carrying burdens that never showed on the outside. Lucas followed with Ranger, pausing at the door as Thomas stepped inside. The interior was dim, the cold air thicker inside the metal shell, dust motes dancing in the light that spilled through the cracked windows. Thomas moved with quiet familiarity, folding a thin blanket, picking up a few books, placing them into a canvas bag with slow, deliberate care. Lucas waited, letting the silence remain, Ranger sitting at his side, eyes scanning the interior before returning to Thomas, who paused for a moment, looking around the small space as if taking a final inventory of the years he had spent living in borrowed places. Thomas turned, stepping back down onto the platform, the canvas bag slung over his shoulder, the collar now clipped carefully to a strap where it could hang openly, the brass tag swaying gently as he moved. "I think it's time." His voice was steady, the words lightening the air as they fell. Lucas smiled, Ranger stepping forward to fall into pace beside Thomas as they began to walk, the morning sun lifting higher, casting long shadows across the platform that moved as they moved, the gentle sway of the brass tag catching the light with each step. For a moment, there was nothing but the soft sound of footsteps, the quiet breathing of a dog who understood the sacredness of silence, and the steady movement of a man who was learning that letting go could also mean moving forward. The morning light had shifted by the time they reached the community center, the thin Colorado sun warming the sidewalks and catching on the glass doors as they opened, letting in a hush of cold air that smelled of pine and distant wood smoke. Thomas stepped through the doorway, the canvas bag on his shoulder, the brass tag on Max's collar swaying gently against the fabric with each step. Ranger walked beside him, close enough that their steps nearly matched, the soft tap of claws on tile a steady rhythm that echoed in the quiet hallway. Lucas followed a step behind, eyes moving over the small details of the place, the photos of veterans on the walls, the bulletin board pinned with handwritten notes and flyers for meetings, the small coffee station already set up with paper cups and a stack of sugar packets arranged in a careful row. They paused at the entrance to the room where the group met each Tuesday. The door was open, warm air spilling out, carrying the scent of coffee and the quiet murmur of conversation, the sound of chairs shifting as people settled in. A circle of folding chairs waited in the center, some already occupied by men and women who carried the same quiet weight in their shoulders, in the careful way they moved, in the silence that followed them even when they tried to leave it behind. Thomas stood there for a moment, his hand resting on the strap where Max's collar hung, eyes on the circle, the soft lines around his mouth tightening as he took a breath. Ranger sat beside him, eyes lifting to Thomas with that quiet patience that seemed to fill the spaces where words could not go, a calm reminder that he was not alone, not today. Lucas placed a hand lightly on Thomas's shoulder, a steadying presence without words, before stepping back, letting Thomas take this step for himself. The room fell quieter as Thomas entered, heads turning, eyes lifting, small nods of recognition and welcome passing around the circle. Thomas moved to an empty chair, pausing before he sat, unclipping Max's collar from the strap on his bag and holding it in both hands for a moment. The brass tag swayed gently, catching the light, the small clink of metal on metal sounding louder than it was, pulling the attention of the room gently toward him. "I'd like to share something today." His voice was soft, but it carried the quiet strength in it enough to hold the space as the others settled, eyes on him, giving him the silence he needed to continue. "This is Max." Thomas lifted the collar slightly, letting the tag swing, the name almost worn away but still there. a faint promise etched into brass. He was my partner. Thomas's voice caught for a moment, but he did not stop, did not look away. He saved my life more than once, and for a long time I didn't know how to carry that, how to honor that without feeling like I was failing him every day I woke up without him beside me. The circle remained quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the heater against the cold outside, and Ranger's quiet breathing as he sat at the edge of the circle, eyes on Thomas, ears flicking gently with each word. I kept him hidden away, under a seat, in a bag, anywhere I could so I wouldn't have to look at what I lost. But today, I think I'm ready to let him be seen. Thomas's eyes lifted, meeting the eyes of those around him, the small nods, the quiet, understanding glances that carried no judgment, only recognition. Because I don't think letting go means forgetting. I think it means letting him walk with me, letting him be part of the story I'm still writing. He set the collar carefully on his knee, letting it rest there, the brass tag swaying gently as he exhaled, his shoulders lowering, the tightness around his mouth easing as the room seemed to exhale with him. Thank you for letting me share him with you. The quiet remained for a moment, warm and steady, before a voice spoke from across the circle, low and rough, but kind. Thank you for bringing him here. Thomas nodded, blinking once, the light catching in the corner of his eyes as he reached down to brush a thumb over the brass tag, the small gesture filled with a tenderness that spoke louder than any words. Outside the window, the flag moved in the breeze, the soft snap of fabric echoing in the cold morning air. Lucas stood quietly near the doorway, Ranger sitting at his side, both watching as Thomas sat a little straighter, the collar now resting openly in his hands, no longer hidden, no longer something to be carried alone. Lucas looked down at Ranger, who lifted his eyes to meet his handler's gaze, tail tapping once on the floor, a quiet confirmation that they had done what they came to do. As the meeting continued, Thomas stayed there, the collar in his lap, the brass tag catching the light each time he moved, a small promise shining in the quiet room, a reminder that loyalty and love do not end when a service ends, that memory is not a weight meant to crush but a bond meant to guide. And in that warm, quiet space, surrounded by others who knew the language of grief and the quiet hope of healing, Thomas began to tell the story of Max, letting his partner's memory breathe, letting it become something living again, a part of the world that could be shared and honored, no longer hidden away under a seat, but carried openly with love. Thank you for listening to the end of this story. If it touched you or made you think about the quiet loyalty and love we often carry, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next story we share. We would love to hear your thoughts and perspectives, so feel free to leave a comment below. Your voice matters here, and your insights help us keep sharing stories that connect us all.